This is an essay for the Common Application. The prompt is discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. And the essay is titled Astronaut Food. And right off the bat, I do want to mention that I don't think that essay titles make a ton of sense with college essays, right? Now, there are some times where it doesn't hurt you, obviously, and it's very rarely going to hurt you. But to me, an essay title is typically a waste of words, right? The title doesn't really add that much. And if anything, I'd much rather see you immediately grab the reader's attention directly from the introduction. So I'm not a big fan of titling my essay, but I mean, that's obviously something that you can do if you really want to. I just don't think it adds that much to a college essay generally. Okay. How much longer until it cools down? I moan, staring at the silver bag upright on the boulder in front of me. I fixate on steam as it exits the container, strikes the frosty air, and dissipates into the star-studded darkness overhead. My stomach has lost its grip on the final gram of protein from the power bar I've last eaten, and my impatience is soaring. Finally, I bury my fingers into the hefty backpack at my feet, in pursuit of the poke of fork prongs, so I can tear apart the packaging and indulge in my dinner, freeze-dried beef stew. What I'd normally put off as nasty astronaut food now looks and tastes like the winning dish off of Top Chef, because I've been working towards it all day. Okay, interesting introduction. I immediately get the sense that you're kind of doing something in the wilderness. That's very cool. And if anything, I would say that I like having astronaut food down here, and it just reiterates for me why I wouldn't want you to have astronaut food as a title. But for the audience here, right, this is an example of an essay that's pulling you immediately into the action. You're being pulled immediately into the action, into what's happening, and they're setting the stage. They're doing a really great job of setting the stage for what's happening. Now, I'll admit, while I'm dragging my 30-pound pack through the day's 16th or 17th mile, wringing muddy water out of my socks and shorts and shirt and hair after a treacherous river crossing, or nearing a boxing match with my water filter as it refuses to cooperate, the vision of a much-needed meal is far from motivation to persist. Rather, it's in the moments that I'm eating that I can reflect on the real drive behind my backpacking expeditions. Okay, so I like what you're doing here, right? You're sort of trying to set up the main thrust of the essay, which seems like it's going to be about why you're interested in backpacking. I will say that this sentence was just way too long and very confusing, right? I like this bit of humor here with the muddy water in your socks and your shirts and your shorts in your hair, but this sentence was way too long, and it made this paragraph harder to read. And that, I think, stopped the momentum of the essay a little bit for me, right? There's also something a little bit confusing about this sentence, right? So basically you're saying that as you're dragging your pack through the day's 16th or 17th mile, the vision of a meal is not motivating for you to move forward, right? So this is a little bit confusing to me, just because in this first paragraph, you speak very passionately about like astronaut food, right? Of freeze-dried beef stew, right? But then you turn around and you say that getting to your meal is not a motivation to persist. It's a little bit confusing from where your first paragraph came from. So that lost me a little bit when you went from the first paragraph where you're sort of writing lovingly about your meal to the second paragraph where you're saying that actually the meal is not that motivating or not that important to you. In that first paragraph, it seems like the meal is the single most important thing that you can have on your backpacking expedition, or one of the most important things you can have on your backpacking expedition. In the second sort of paragraph, you flip that around, but I don't think it's done in a way that is appropriate, I think. So, or it's not done in a way that makes that an effective twist, I guess. All right. Paragraph number 3. Refreshed, face in food, I'm able to appreciate what a complete discomfort I was in for the majority of the day. I became numb to the metronomic clank of bear spray canisters against my bag, the raw pierces of ice shards as I fell hip-deep into thick walls of snow, the feelings of disorientation as I trekked further and further from the safety of any trail. Outdoor recreation is usually treated as an opportunity to de-stress and sensitize, and I felt like I was accomplishing these tasks, yet I was subconsciously pursuing intensity and struggle. Somehow, the sport that is supposed to bring me closer to myself, my peers, and natures, is the one that has spawned my self-image as an unconventional competitor who rivals her own deepest identity. When I realize I'm treading on literal thin ice above a gushing stream, I resolve to press on, not because I'm brave, but because I'm challenging myself to be brave. As nighttime sleet storms roll in, I curl up tighter in my tent, refusing to give in to the sub-freezing temperatures. If my dad advances at a faster pace than me, I don't mind. But if my own stride frequency begins to waver, it's game on. Okay. So a couple of thoughts on this paragraph. First of all, this paragraph was a little bit too long, right? Generally speaking, a good guideline for your paragraph is 3 to 4 sentences, right? In general, you want to have paragraphs that are 3 to 4 sentences long, maybe 5 sentences long, right? I'm also seeing a pattern where you have these really long compound sentences. And a thing I will say is that in general, when you have a lot of long sentences, your writing becomes harder to read, right? So again, this is more like technique stuff than it is content stuff necessarily, but your content and your technique work together, right? In order for the payoff of your writing to be highest, you have to make sure that your essay is really readable. And right now, your essay is harder to read because you have these long sentences, and now you have this super long paragraph here, okay? Beyond that, it feels like you're introducing a lot of concepts here about, a sport, how the sport drives you competitively. And I guess you're trying to make the point that you're sort of internally motivated, but right now you're just stating that point. You're just stating that you believe those things, but you're not really showing me or telling me why, right? I don't know why the sport pushes you. All I know is that the sport pushes you, if that makes sense. I don't know why you compete against yourself, right? Like right now you're telling me that you compete against yourself and you compete against your own sort of like, your own performance. That's great. And that's an interesting concept, but I need you to reflect one level deeper and actually tell me why do you believe that? In particular, this idea of your dad advancing at a faster pace than you, but your own stride frequency starting to waver, that's being the one that kind of triggers you. That's a really cool concept. I'd love to see you reflect more on that. And maybe you will in the rest of the essay, in which case, great. But if not, that's kind of the next level deeper that you need to go to make this a really compelling and powerful essay. Okay. It takes a little willpower to prevent even eating from becoming a race against the clock. But in my freeze-dried dinners, I find rejuvenation that underscores my exhaustion, a secret symbol of success. Along with watered-down chunks of carrots and potatoes, I consume a craving for the paradoxical pleasure of weakness and the empowerment of knowing that I can regulate my own drain in the face of a challenge. Okay? Yeah, so again, this flashes me back to that second paragraph, where I feel like you've kind of confused your message and what you're trying to convey with this essay and the use of your dinner as a kind of framing device and as a peg for the overall essay, right? Here, again, it seems like that dinner is really, really important to you. But now as a reader, I'm confused because you spent the entire second paragraph or, one really long sentence in the second paragraph telling me that the dinner wasn't that important to you. And I get that's maybe me getting caught up on something that's besides the point of the essay. But it's one of those things that's tripping me up as a reader, and it may well trip up an admissions officer as well. So you really want to be careful about that kind of stuff, right? You really want to be thoughtful about reading through your entire essay and making sure that everything kind of fits together and everything's logical, right? There shouldn't be stuff that, like, if something is different than the way you presented it at the beginning, there should be a logical presentation as to why. But here you're kind of going back and forth, and that's one of the things that's taking me out of the essay. The other thing I'll say is there are a couple of places where you try to use really advanced language, and you're obviously an excellent writer and you have really, really strong language skills and really good word choice and great descriptive writing. But in a couple of places that your attempt to use advanced language actually makes your essay harder to understand, right? So along with watered down chunks of carrots and potatoes, I consume a craving for the paradoxical pleasure of weakness. I don't know what that means. Right. And I've read thousands and thousands of college essays. I've seen writing on all ends of the spectrum. I couldn't tell you what I consume a craving for the paradoxical pleasure of weakness means. So you want to just be careful. And this is a broader message to everyone out there. When you're using advanced language, you should only use advanced language when it is genuinely a better way of conveying your underlying point. I don't know what you're trying to convey with this, right? But I couldn't understand what you were trying to convey with this. And again, it made me confused and it took away from the essay for me. Okay. In this final flash of the day, I feel like I've emptied all of my vigor into the world and observed it reflected back at me. I'm usually not alone, but I discover a radiating familiarity with myself that I take when I leave the trail, too. I might be an individual, but I have a grasp on what I bring to the table, and I've learned to use my competitiveness to push the boundaries in collaborative environments. Intimate experience with my limits allows me to open up to external challenges instead of shutting down. A tendency towards difficulty can bring about a trailblazing attitude, unwavering ambition, and yes, some healthy interpersonal competition, which connect those around me. Okay? So So this is where I'm a little bit uncertain about your essay, right? Because half of the essay, which is the parts where you talk about dinner, regardless of how confusing they are, that half of the essay seems to be about kind of how the moments when you're eating on a broader wilderness trek or something like that are your moments of greatest reflection. They're the moments where you're able to kind of think and introspect and reflect and think about your life. Okay, great. That's like one concept over there. Then there's a second concept, which is that you compete against yourself when you're trekking. Right now, the essay feels like those two concepts are kind of just introduced independently, and they don't really fit together, right? And this is sometimes a common sort of trope, right? Where you really want to use something very, very descriptive and very, very, use something that allows you to write with a lot of imagery and descriptive writing and beautiful writing, right? And then in your dinner and the sort of the paradoxical way in which you're you're talking about the beef stew, absolutely does kind of fit that bill. And then you have the part of the underlying point that you're trying to make in the essay. But it's really, really important that those two things work together. You have to make sure that you have to make sure that those two parts of the essay, like those two components, actually fit together. Right now, this looks like two essays where you kind of just like copy pasted paragraphs from like the two different essays, and you kind of like did like a merge of them together, right? Where you kind of push them together. So the essay needs to kind of be connected a little bit more. Right now, I don't know what the link is between your dinner and your competitiveness, other than the sort of thin idea that like your dinner is when you get to reflect on your broader experience with hiking. Well, if that's the case, then your dinner should be a much smaller portion of the essay, right? Your food and that eating experience should be a much smaller portion of the essay. And this reflection on your competitiveness should be a bigger portion of the essay. The other thing I would say is that right now, you're telling me a lot of things about your competitiveness and your sort of internal motivation. But you're not showing them to me, right? It's not actually illustrated by anything you're doing in the essay, right? You're just telling me that you are competitive against yourself, but you're not actually showing that to me through the things that you're doing in the story, right? So I actually see a question in the Q&A, which is, should an essay be more narrative or more introspection? Ideally, it shouldn't be one or the other. It should be a combination. The narrative should further the introspection, right? So a great way to think about it is in the context of this essay. Let's say that this person was trying to tell a story about mountaineering and about doing outdoors activities, right? What you want, the ideal version of the story would be an essay where the narrative is showing that she's super competitive against herself, and then she's reflecting on top of that about why that is. Why is she internally motivated? Why does it matter to her if her performance slips, but not if, say, her father or someone else beats her? Why does that matter, right? Like, the narrative and the introspection should work together. And then a lot of what you're telling me with your words right now, that you're competitive, that you're internally motivated, all those stuff, that stuff should be shown to me via the story that you're telling, which then leaves you space to be able to reflect on why you have those feelings and those motivations. Okay. Final paragraph here. In curious expeditions to come, I'll continue to seek out these moments of cognizance, of tasting the power of motive and will to give astronaut food an impossibly exceptional flavor. Yeah. So again, you bring it back to the astronaut food. Right. So as I said earlier, I feel like this essay does need to be reworked a decent amount. You either need to make this more about the sort of respite that you get from, sitting down to eat your astronaut food at the end of the day, and actually dive deeper into that concept, or this essay needs to be a lot more about your competitiveness and about kind of you reflecting on why that is the case, right? So that's kind of high level. I think that right now it feels like two essays stapled together. It needs to feel like one essay, right? And beyond that, I would say that the other things that kind of jump off the page to me with this essay are, first, you have a lot of really long sentences. Try to vary the length of your sentences and, in general, shorten them to make your essay more readable. That's one. Two is, again, you're using the advanced language a lot, right? And in a lot of cases, it's working well, but there are some cases where it's very confusing. So you just want to make sure that you're using that language correctly and that you're not getting overcomplicated with your language, right? And then the third thing is you basically want to make sure that you spend more time reflecting on why. You tell me a lot of things about your personality, about your motivations, about who you are, but I want you to reflect on why. You got to go a level deeper, I think, to make this essay as powerful as it can be for top tier schools.